Hi, everyone, and welcome to What is Metamodern Conversations. Today, we're pleased to have Raoul Eshelman in conversation with us. Raoul is an American Slavist who has lived and worked in Germany for the last 45 years. He was a professor of Slavic literature at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich until retirement 3 years ago, and became interested in postmodernism around the year 2000. He's written 3 books and numerous articles about it, including 2 that we're going to be discussing today. The first is Performatism, or the End of Postmodernism, written in 2008, or published in 2008. And the second would be, recently published, Transcending the Postmodern, Performatism 2.0, 2024. And he also has a website, performatism.de, which I highly recommend people take a look at if you're interested in theories of postmodernism. And we'll put it in the show notes as well. It has his in-depth commentaries, reviews, and a lot of source material. And both Greg and I have had a lot of chances to use performatism, Raoul's theory, and in our own works on metamodernism. So we're really happy to have a chance to talk with you today. Welcome, Raoul.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here to meet Greg virtually for the first time. I think
nice to meet you.
We met once. We met once in personally in Munich.
That's right.
A number of years ago.
Yes, that was right before the Metamodernism conference that Greg and I had come to Europe to attend, actually, in 2019.
And that was pre-COVID, or it was somewhere around then, yeah.
Just pre-COVID, that's right.
The year, but the summer before.
The summer of innocence.
Yeah.
So today we'll be talking about what performatism is as compared to metamodernism, and about postmodernism in general. We'll talk about transcendence and about the literary terrain of fools and geniuses and of evil, and whatever else may come up today. So we'd like to start off with a couple questions that will help us, I think, put some basics on the table for the general viewer and for the rest of the discussion. They're kind of complementary questions. So first of all, for people who are unfamiliar, to get a sense for what type of a concept performatism is, what its purpose is chiefly, or what type of work it's doing. And then also, following that, to start to compare and talk about to what extent there's overlap, as mentioned, from metamodernism to performatism. And we hope that will sort of find its way winding through our conversation today throughout. So yeah, do you want to go ahead and tackle that one, Raoul?
Yeah, performatism is basically an attempt to get literary history going again after postmodernism. I think during postmodernism has this idea of post-history that basically, well, things happen, obviously, in postmodernism to postmodernists, but they view these as sort of ironic iterations of things that happened previously. Basically, this kind of ironic deferral and play is what replaces old history. And what I try to do is basically bring back good old history in the sense of trying to find an epical boundary. In other words, a break with postmodernism. This is one difference between my own approach and I think your approach, or with the braiding and the bending and the oscillation, is that I bring back the good old dialectic, which involves a functional negation of the previous epoch. So you have postmodernism, which is very ironic, which is full of play, which places a great emphasis on difference. I think this is the main. How would you put it? If you, in epistemic terms, if you want to define how postmodernism approaches the world, it's that creating difference is the most important thing in culture and in discourse in the arts. It's the endless production of difference. So how do you stop that? How do you not be ironic? How do you contain this these endless bifurcations of difference. And the way I approached it was that I started to basically look at movies like American Beauty, I think was one in the beginning. Amelie was another, The Life of Pi. These were sort of classic examples of films that could no longer be explained by simply ironic iterations of something previously. They were doing something different. And what I noted, and I made essentially into a much broader theory, was that these movies or novels, short stories, many things at the time, were creating double frames to cut off the irony, which work in the following way, vastly simplified, is that these movies, films, whatever, novels would create a point of identification within their storylines, and then basically force the readers on a much higher level, on the level of the higher, on a higher narrative level, to identify with those positive points within a story. So that the readers, in a certain sense, forced or trapped. This is a very important part of the theory, and it goes back to neoclassical ideas of order. And so this is one important difference between metamodernism and performatism, is that performatism is very, very neoclassical in the sense that it analyzes how order is imposed on through form, imposed on the viewer or on readers in such a way that they believe. And this is, I think, one thing that we have in common is we're interested in belief, in transcendence, in experiencing positive states. Now, this is something that is common to metamodernism and performatism, is that the previously, rather pessimistic, the often rather cynical, the rather ironic attitude of postmodernism can now be replaced by something positive. And this positive, the problem is, or I don't know if it's a problem, is that these positive experiences are artificially induced. They're induced in performatism. They're induced by the pressure of form. They're forcible. And I think in metamodernism, you would talk of an oscillation. They sort of revolve around the oscillation causes this irony to be arrested, so to speak. So this is I think the basic, some of the basic commonalities and differences between, from my point of view, between performatism and metamodernism.
Great, thank you. And so in addition to sort of restarting or rebooting literary analysis, as I believe you said,
literary history, not literary analysis, but literary history.
Okay.
Specifically literary history.
Okay, great. We might also say that commonly we're making attempts to just on a very basic level, we're making attempts to conceptualize what postmodernism is, right? So
yes.
The purpose of each term, one parallel way that we can look at them. And you bring in many of the major attempts to conceptualize postmodernism along with metamodernism into your 2.0. So, and naturally, the answers about what is central to what is postmodernism, how we're conceptualizing them, are a bit different, right?
Yeah, I take a pretty open approach. I mean, I have a pretty open attitude toward these other approaches. You have Wolfgang Funk, who talks about meta-referential authenticity, which is similar in a certain sense. You have readers or viewers experiencing authenticity, but this authenticity is caused by an artificial frame, which he calls meta-referential. So there are overlaps there. You have who else do you have? You have Charles Huber also who does something similar. And you have what would be another, I'm trying to think of another one, Mary Kay Holland, who focuses on realism, but it's not real realism, it's a kind of artificially induced realism. So we're all basically talking about the same thing, using slightly different approaches, and slightly also sometimes quite different terminology. But I think there is a consensus among the people who treat cultural artifacts and analyze them that we're talking about pretty much the same thing.
Yes, that's right. You do a kind of breakdown of these different forms or schools or theories, and then you do say that there is a common ground to them. What's interesting for us too is, and we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, is that there are products that you would call performatists that we would call metamodern, and then there are some cultural products, films, novels, and such that you call performatists that we wouldn't necessarily say are metamodern. And so that does mean there is some difference in how we're, how we're defining what this post-postmodern shift is doing. So,
Yeah, I don't find that to be such a problem. I think it's more of a sort of a normal problem that anybody has when they're analyzing things, that other people will look at things a little bit differently. I don't think it's a problem of principle. It's just a lot of it is just different, often subjective viewpoints. I don't have. I mean, I've read the things you've written. I have no problems. I would have no problems viewing them in terms of performatism. Maybe we can do that later about maybe the one or other work. There are differences. So, I mean, I don't agree with all the metamodernist analyses, but for the most part, by and large, I think there is a considerable overlap.
well, let's talk for a minute about the differences between your performatism 1.0, if we can call it that for shorthand, and your 2.0. I was looking at a publication that's even earlier of yours called Performatism or the End of Postmodernism, an essay in Anthropoetics, the Journal of Generative Anthropology in 2000. And I thought I'd read just a little bit of a quote from that to give even a little bit more sort of coloring in the lines and the shape of performatism vis-a-vis postmodernism. You wrote, "The way out of postmodernism this is a bit of a paraphrase, it's not an exact quote, but the way out of postmodernism does not lead through the intensified search for meaning, through the introduction of new surprising forms, or through the return to an authentic origin. Instead, it must take place through a mechanism completely impervious to postmodernism's modes of dispersal, deconstruction, and proliferation. This mechanism, which has been making itself felt with increasing strength in the cultural events of the last few years, which would be pre-2000 at that point, can be best understood using the notion of performance." So I think for some people, just trying to get their head around what performatism and the use of the term performance is doing and is pointing to might be helpful.
Yeah, okay. So this is one of the major misunderstandings about performatism, because I wasn't talking about, playing the guitar or dancing or anything like this. I was thinking of once more, this is a kind of a neoclassical trope of per formam is going, or I have to mispronounce, my Latin pronunciation is very German, per formam, that is going through form. In other words, an idea, the neoclassical idea was that the ideas that go through form are influenced by that form, and that form it creates difficulties, that creates a certain rigor that the artist or the writer or whoever must master. So this was the basic idea behind performatism. It was not performance, it was this performum, this idea that form is being imposed on readers by authors, and also obviously that form disciplines is connected with a certain discipline. And all of this is pretty much anathema to postmodernists, where anything that is a frame, a form, discipline is authoritarian, is totalitarian, this is not just aesthetically suspicious, it's politically very suspicious. So this is still the basis of my approach. This idea that form imposes a certain attitude or approach upon readers, and that readers are not able to simply escape this imposed form through an ironic attitude. The idea being that if you do that, you have to ignore the work itself.
That actually makes a lot of sense to me in terms of the double frame, and in terms of some of the ideas you introduce in Performatism 2.0, like chunking, where the author or the creator imposes a discrete kind of structure of time on the narrative, and the reader has to kind of choose to allow that to take over. I will say that in the term performatism, I had kind of inferred for myself, and you can tell me if this is off base or if it actually does work. I had sort of taken performatism to mean performance of belief, like not just performance in general, but that performatist works get to a belief or get to a transcendence, but it's understood that it's through something constructed or performed. And I'm hearing that meaning of performance is not really the main thing you had in mind with the term.
No, actually, yes, you said it better than I did. This is, in other words, I suppose the goal of these kind of works is to achieve some kind of transcendence. This is also something that I emphasize a lot in Performatism 2.0. I think in the beginning, transcendence was just one of the things that could be striven for. But I've come to believe that it's actually probably the most important aspect of this entire epical or epistemic aesthetic, whatever you want to call it. In other words, form is imposed on you, but you overcome that form in a performance, so that you can. But just to make clear that I'm not it's not a theory of dramatic performance or a theory of musical performance or anything like that. It's just it has to be understood in the specific way that you've used it. But that's a quite correct understanding of what I was trying to get at. So basically the difference between Performatism 1.0 and 2.0. 2.0, I think, is first of all focuses on narrative genres. It's in the first book I was talking about art. I was talking about art, philosophy, movies, and novels. I was talking, and architecture. I think that was another thing that I was talking about that really is beyond my actual training. And so I went back to talking about the things that I know most about, which are movies and books. And one of the differences is obviously that when I started writing 2000 and then 2008, when the book came out, there were really no competing theories in that sense. So there was nobody to really to talk about. This is one thing that I did try to do systematically in the new book, is to talk about the theories in as generous way as possible. Another thing that Greg mentioned was to talk about time, that I now advanced a theories of time, which I associate with chunking. We might be able to go into more detail about that later. And I also expanded my initial idea of or concept of subjectivity, which was originally concentrated around fools. And this was now expanded to include geniuses. So you have this genius-fool continuum. There are also middle people who are neither nor, but these are the two main poles. And one important thing I always thought was that you don't find geniuses or fools in postmodernism. You find other types, but these are comparatively rare. Another thing that I wanted to touch on was globalization. I try to avoid sort of critiques of capitalism, the very wide-ranging political analyses, just because they are so transient. They become obsolete very, very quickly. But globalization is something that has been with us for a long time and probably will be with us. And so I also addressed that from my peculiar perspective. And another thing that I also did in the book is to talk about sexuality or sexual orientation. What happens when previously marginal sexual orientations, mainly homosexuality, being gay, when these become centered, when they become when they become part of the norm? What happens when this reversal takes place? So I think those are some of the main new points in the new book.
Great, thank you. Well, of the many topics you just named, there's certainly several that are on our list to talk about. And so if you don't mind, a bit arbitrary, but if you won't mind talking a bit more about transcendence, since that is, in fact, right there in the title of your book. It's a major concept. And first, if you don't mind, I'd like to say how it was so interesting for me personally to read about that, because your usage of the term differs from my usage in my work on metamodernism and the arena of the mystical and of non-ordinary experience, which in my discipline of religious studies certainly centers concepts of transcendence, not necessarily theologically, but certainly recognizing the need to grapple with religious narratives and claims of transcendent experiences, mystical enlightenment, and so forth. So in my context, the term transcendence is juxtaposed with the immanent, the worldly. And so a transcendence narrative, or what I also kind of theorized as a transcendence model of soteriology, is simply one that in which the ultimate truth is found in the beyond, in a transcendent space. So I actually try to relanguage without using the term transcendence to escape that binary, because in my notions of metamodern spiritualities or mysticisms, the innovation is that one's felt experience isn't necessarily divided down these lines anymore of spiritual or secular, transcendent or worldly, immanent. So I talk, instead of transcendence, about transformation. Excuse me. I think a bird flew into the window. Interesting moment there.
Yes.
Yeah. So where the mystical narratives that I read happen, the juice happens as much in the immanent and the world-based realm as it does in these higher realms that have heretofore been, if we can just generally say, sort of the spiritual goal, transcending this world. So your usage, on the contrary, is really fascinating to me, and I do feel there are these points of overlap that are really exciting to me to bring into my research. But as you state, yours is more of an anthropological / philosophical usage. So I wondered if first you could just say something more about that.
Yeah, that's basically, once more, I'm in basic agreement with what you're saying, is that when I talk about transcendence, I'm not talking about necessarily about things beyond, totally beyond our ken, things that are supernatural occurrences. I'm not talking about angels flapping with wings. This doesn't have to happen. One of the challenges I had was approaching seemingly realistic post-postmodern narratives. And what I found was, I think, also jibes with what you would call transformation. In other words, on one level, that you have characters who, in a certain sense, overcome something. They overcome themselves. They overcome, once more, these constraints, these what I would call the double framing. They're trapped in something, in some sort of frame. It can be usually it's some sort of biosocial predicament, autism being the most notable kind of situation. And they managed to overcome this in some way. So this is one form of transcendence that I borrowed this from Heidegger, who says that it's going from the inside to the out, to that people are encapsulated and they overcome this encapsulation. This is one form of transcendence. The second term that I use is also borrowed from Heidegger, which he calls, I think, theological transcendence, which is the idea that there is where there is some sort of higher force, some higher power that is beyond our ken and that we are not able to explain. And this is the second part of my narrative approach, I suppose, is that where narrative blocks our understanding of something, absolutely, usually through tricks of some narrative, tricks of some kind. This is a way of stylizing transcendence. So you have these two things which are different ways of, let's say, stylizing transcendence that are, sometimes they mix, sometimes they don't. But it is possible to have narrative works that where nothing otherworldly or supernatural or paranormal happens, but in which you have a very, very distinct feeling of that something has changed, something has transformation is also one way of putting it. And I think one difference, so the thing that I enjoyed about your and Greg's work is that it's actually anchored in some sort of, sociologically describable experience that I was just not really familiar with. That I think the spiritual but not religious movement, I wasn't even aware of it when I was doing my work. So this, for me, this was just a confirmation that in social terms, that there are things going on, let's say in the real world, that correspond to these developments in fiction.
Yeah, I would say that there is some sense in, so one thing you said was that there's a sense of overcoming, and it could be overcoming a number of things. It could be very worldly, very this worldly overcoming, which it finds itself in an interesting, I think, analog to spiritual transformative recognitions or realization. There's something unknowable or there's a quality of the unknowable. It doesn't have to be supernatural unknowable, but it can be analogous in some ways. I'm still kind of playing with how those two things work side by side in my mind, but you'd written that postmodern literature opens up a horizon of potential transcendence. And,
I think that's, yeah.
Right, so that
whereas, as postmodernism basically kills it.
Shuts it down.
Postmodernism, shuts it down.
Purposefully.
Killing is not the right word, but postmodernism is devoted to basically to debunking any sort of aspiration or claim to transcendence. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a really basic difference.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is a good point maybe to talk about the usages of, or just the treatment of interiority, felt experience, the subject, and what sort of mode of transformation or what mode of, that's...
Well, can I say a few things?
Yes, please.
Okay, so again, kind of like my take on the term, and I'm curious whether it works, is for transcendence, I've thought of it I've thought of the way you use transcendence to mean transcending for the subject or the self to have the opportunity to transcend the postmodern contextualizing discourse that kind of would tend to pull everything into it and dissolve the uniqueness of any individual perspective or sense of existence. Or also transcend what you might call modernist materialism. So the sort of modernist attempt to explain and understand everything in terms of smaller parts and basic forces and things like that. And so the transcendence, as you said, it doesn't have to be like angels flying around with wings or going to another realm, but it's the self transcending these tendencies, either in modernism or postmodernism, to deny this subject or the self or the interiority or the felt experience.
The way I approach it, the specific way I approach it, is to think of the subject as somebody who is let's say, an ideal postmodernist subject, performative subject, as somebody who is radically separated from everyone else. I mean, this is the best way to shut out the discourse, to shut out all these influences that are coming from all over the place. And the two the extremes of this are the fool and the genius. Both are separated from the rest of society through a lack of logic on the part of the fool, and on the genius and of not being able to be understood by. I think that's the definition of genius. You don't understand what they're really doing. They have this erratic quality to them.
You get
obviously
that, you get that what they're doing is good and great and interesting, but you can't actually explain it or reduce it.
And this is, of course, both traditionally. I mean, this is something that is traditional to Western society and probably to other societies. Is that these types of people are considered to have some sort of divine connection. This is the traditional. I don't know, this traditional anthropology. And it seems to me that these separated figures, who are framed in a certain sense, they are enclosed, they're encapsulated, they're stuck in this frame, that somehow they have to overcome that. And so this is the driving force behind a lot of postmodern performatist narratives, is that you have these figures who have something divine about them simply because we can't explain them, but at the same time this divine encapsulation or framing is a burden, is something that is basically something they experience as a burden, as a problem, as something that they have to overcome.
As a problem because they're separated, right? Because of that.
Because they're separated. Yeah. The separation has two sides. The first is it gives them the opportunity to become sort of a portal to transcendence, or act as a portal to transcendence, but at the same time it makes it impossible or difficult to communicate with other people, or to form bonds with other people, so that this notion of bonding, which I picked up from the German philosopher Peter Sloterdijk, becomes also very important in this in enacting transcendence. That bonding, which is something that basically doesn't happen in postmodern narratives of any kind, that this bonding becomes the essential feature of many performatist narratives.
Because bonding would then have to be deconstructed. It's also right.
In a postmodern it would have to be deconstructed, but this bonding is something that is once more is not possible in postmodernism, certainly, which would just be viewed as a kind of an illusion, a projection that has to be taken apart.
So it sounds sort of paradoxical that we're saying that the separation of the character from everybody else actually allows the transcendence into bonding. that postmodernism doesn't allow, but that feels right. And
yeah. This is basically this separation is sort of the formal, the formal separation that makes it possible makes an exertion possible to overcome it, to transform, to transcend, whatever word you want to use to describe it.
so it might be glib, but one way to kind of translate that into kind of metamodernism terminology would be that there's an oscillation between the separateness and the bonding. And the act of the separateness compels the return to the bonding, and the bonding is kind of compels one to actually see the individual separateness of the people.
I think it's just another, once more, like I said, I'm a neoclassicist. And metamodernism is romantic. And so that romantics don't like form being imposed on them. Okay, this is something that the 19th century neoclassicists were always arguing with the romantics about. And so it's a looser way of approaching the same thing. Like, I really emphasize this, this rigor, this force that is being imposed on these characters, on these situations. And I think metamodernism is more into this. The oscillation is kind of it's freer, it's romantic, but I think it's legit. I mean, it's legit. It's a legitimate way of approaching it. It also depends on what you happen to be looking at.
Yeah, I think that we're both talking about a kind of recognition that in the post-postmodern period that we live in a world we're not all bonded, we are separate. Sometimes we're bonded. It's not all light and goodness, and that in the narratives that we examine, in a way, you can't get to wholeness without going through the dark. You have to have the separation to get to the bonding. And so it's like it works through and with the sense of separation to make a kind of a social move happen. And you have this quote in Performatism: "Separation is not the goal or the end point." Did I read this already?
No, but it's no.
Okay. Rather, the goal or end is to transcend that separation in some way, to bond with others, to defer violence, or to transmit a gift of some kind without calculation or reason. And I kind of wanted to underscore and talk about that, without calculation or reason, because I think it sort of escorts us to this topic of the character who, as you mentioned, the fools, the geniuses, being either a bit guileless or non-heroic, not a modernist, I'm out to save the world hero narrative, but one who is removed from the discourse in such a way that they are actually protected from some of that. And I wanted to ask, I want to say a lot about this because it's a great topic, and I just think it's a great contribution for anyone who reads literature or consumes, narratives of any kind, to think about the fools and the geniuses. But like, how is it peculiarly postmodern? What about the classic fool characters that are anachronistic to this time period? Say, Mr. Magoo or Peter Sellers' character in Being There, or even say Don Quixote. What do we say? What do you say about those in terms of performatism?
Okay, this is always a tricky question because sort of anachronistic fools. I mean, there's a long tradition of also in my field in Russian culture. You have a long tradition of holy fools. That Dostoevsky's The Idiot is one classic example of this, and there are many others. Russian culture is full of fools. That Ivan Durak, or Ivan the Fool, is one of these stock figures. My answer is, I guess, ultimately historical, and has to do with the context in which these fools, the cultural context in which these fools find themselves. That I think in postmodernism, in performatism, fools are either deliberately or consciously or unconsciously played off against the postmodern notions of tricksters or of liminal figures that exploit that exploit the rules of the game, usually for nefarious purposes, or certainly not for positive purposes. And so that I would place them against this. I think the fools are kind of an archetype. I think that obviously they go back very, very far. But in this case, they are employed in a very specific way to stop postmodern tricksterhood, postmodern irony through their guileless, through their innocence, through their illogical character.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's about context of what kind of a how they're forwarding a certain kind of message, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of well, it's not a direct message, but it's an implicit message that it's more important to be a fool than a wise guy, as somebody who is trying to game the system somehow.
I have a question about that. Would you say that the performatist or postmodern fool is operating against sort of trickster postmodern forces within the narrative only, or is the reader's immersion in an awareness of the postmodern mentality, could that be the force that the performatist fool is operating against, or both?
Yeah, well, I think both. I mean, I think there's, you have this big debate about autism, how autism has become this, this kind of popular diagnosis. And of course, Alan Kirby has written about that extensively, about how autism has become this sort of social, I forget his exact words, but it is kind of in social terms, it's a counterpoint. The autists are viewed as positive in cultural terms because they are not they're not these ironic wise guys, because they can't be. So there is a certain parallel, I think, in social reality to what is going on in literature, or in narrative genres like movies or novels.
Yeah,
I don't know. Does that answer the? I'm not sure.
Actually, not exactly. I guess I was wondering. So, we're talking about why a performatist fool is not the same as the kind of classic archetype fool of some of the examples Linda gave, and many, many others. And the difference is that in the performatist rendering of the fool, they're specifically countering a postmodern trickster who's full of guile and who takes advantage of liminality and ambiguity.
Yeah.
And is that dynamic? So I'm not asking about fools that exist outside of literature. I'm asking, is the fool inside the narrative of the literature defying other forces inside the narrative, or is it defying the reader's awareness and immersion in the culture of tricksterdom? Or
yeah, well, I would think both. Yeah, I would think both. I mean, they sort of run parallel. That they're just the one level is reader response, where you have a reader who's aware of postmodernism, who has certain expectations, and these expectations then sort of run into a brick wall when he or she or they see the fool or the genius, which basically didn't appear all that often in postmodernism. I mean, there are exceptions, obviously, but these were not the dominant figures. I think we want to talk about Cabin in the Woods, that horror movie that you wrote about. That you have a fool who's he's a pot smoking kind of spaced out guy, and he's the only one who really ultimately understands what's going on. And his name is also, I think he's Marty, and he's a martyr. Smarty, but he's also a martyr.
I didn't pick up either of those.
Yeah, see, Marty. I didn't think of Smarty, but he's a martyr also. So this is a classic figure that. But I think I'm not sure. I don't watch a lot of horror movies, and I think this is might be also kind of a staple of these horror movies, that the most innocent person all gets away, isn't slaughtered or chopped up at the end. You know more about this than I do, probably.
Well, neither of us is really aficionados of horror either. It was just this particular film really struck a chord. And I mean, I think there is a trope called the last girl, where there's usually that last
Or the final girl.
the final girl. There we go. That last moment of innocence that doesn't get to be snuffed out. But in this case, well, we're not going to necessarily
Well, I think
a spoiler.
I'm also not an expert on horror, but I think the trope is it's the final girl, and the final girl is supposed to be virginal and both pure of heart, but also pure of experience.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Marty is not really that figure, whereas what was her name?
Dana is that figure.
Dana's that trope. And then, as I think it was Linda who put the line in the chapter that we co-wrote, so I'm going to say, as Linda said, what's revealed in the Cabin in the Woods is that Dana is the narrative is trying to force Dana into that final girl role, that virgin, pure of heart role, but she rebels against being constrained and represented that way, because none of it's actually true, for her. And then the kind of innocence that Marty has as the fool is some other category. I don't know what it's the fool. I mean, literally.
Yeah, it's just artificially. I think he's stoned. One of the characters says he's stoned all the time, and that's why our tricks didn't work. I remember that. I mean, I watched it in Russian. I couldn't access it in English. So a lot of the witticisms escaped me, but I caught that much.
But that is
what I thought about.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, what I thought interesting about the movie when I saw it was that this is also something about what Greg, I think, was maybe also getting at, perhaps, is that all right, you have these characters who are stock figures in a horror movie, but they have some sort of they develop some sort of interiority and agency. But what's also interesting to me is that the movie, the outer frame of the movie forces the viewer into it makes him morally, or him or her, or they morally complicit, in the sense that I think the two creators of the movie say at some point, society wants to bring young people together to have fun and then kill them off.
And kill them, yeah.
And kill them. And I think this is the point of the movie, that in the end, at least, is that who are these gods that want this ritual enacted, and these gods are us. I think this was kind of this was for me the moral point of the movie, that these mysterious gods that release all these creatures and create all this bloodshed it's us. It's the viewers who want this for some reason.
So in the diegesis of the film, the gods live under the planet, and once a year they need to see young people get slaughtered and all this. But in reality, people periodically need to go to movie theaters and watch characters on a screen get slaughtered. That's really interesting.
So that I thought that. Yeah, so I thought that was the performatist point of the movie, is that this moral complicity, I guess, of that is forced upon the viewers. It's us who want this to happen.
Although,
go ahead.
well, the thing that sort of maybe undercuts that reading a little, if I'm understanding you, is the fact that, and I had to watch this several times to really kind of pull it all together myself, that these gods actually do exist. Like, the movie doesn't deconstruct these gods for us. It says, no, they're there, they're real. It's just, and in fact, the agency of the gods' handlers, I forget what they're called in the movie, that they have, or they feel they have a sense of control because they're pulling the levers on these gods, but in the end, get their brain sucked out in a moment, because this is an actual real creature. It's not something that we truly do have control over. So there's this sense of this sort of pre-modern, sense of the monstrous is real.
Well, in contrast,
but the monsters, I would say that the monsters are us. This would be my reading. In other words, that it's these monsters are anthropological, or these gods are anthropological gods. That would be my.
I enjoy that reading of it, and it's completely, arguable or justifiable, for sure. And then it sort of is in conflict a little bit with, I think, what Linda's getting at, and kind of the point we tried to make in the chapter, which is we're comparing Cabin in the Woods to other horror films so Cabin in the Woods is aware of horror tropes. It self-consciously brings in recognizable tropes from horror films, but it's different from other horror films that have done that, such as Scream or Scary Movie. Those are the examples we use, because in these other intertextual horror films, there's no really good, solid explanation in the diegesis of the film for why these tropes are appearing in the world of the characters. So, like, these things are happening, and the characters go, "Oh, I know that. That's in all of the horror movies." And then the audience sort of chuckles at that recognition. But it really doesn't, if you stop and think about it, it doesn't actually make sense in the frame of those movies. The movie doesn't care about a frame or a built reality or anything like that. Whereas in Cabin in the Woods, at the beginning of the movie, we think that we're in another one of these intertextual postmodern, kind of goofs on the classic horror film. But then as the movie goes on, it actually provides a diegetical explanation for everything that's happening. And so, in one sense, the film is saying, no, in our film, the monsters are actually real, and the gods who are invoking the monsters and need the monsters are real. But then I also like your reading of it too, where then you can take another step back perhaps and say that the gods represent the film viewer at the same time. They both work for me, and they're both performatist for me.
That's no, I don't. I also, once more, I don't see any real contradiction in those approaches.
Linda, did the things I said resonate with you?
Yes, and I was just think the whole time I was thinking, I think your reading, Raoul, is actually included within all the readings that were presented, because if you look at it from this sort of, if we want to call it a pre-modern tale of real monsters, we have that view. And then if we want to look at it from the controllers, that's what they're called, the controllers' point of view, they're sort of the modernist layer of thinking that they are engineering reality in such a way that they can control what's going to happen. And we have to try that on, as a viewer, we have to try that on and look at ourselves and look at, if we dismiss the monstrous entirely, look what's going to happen. We're going to have our brain sucked out or whatever. And then you get the other layers on top of that as well.
Yeah.
But at first I was thinking that we were talking about the fool and the individual on the spectrum, for example, and we have, the Forrest Gump, as you've mentioned, one of those really quintessential examples. Greg and I are great fans of the show Community with the character of Abed. I don't know if you've ever watched Community, Raoul.
No, no.
Okay, well that's a terrific example.
Okay, I'll look
Yeah,
into
but
it. It's interesting.
for viewers who have not seen it, or this character, so the character is part of a group of students at a community college, which sounds incredibly boring, but it's actually the fertile ground for
Okay.
all kinds of hijinks. And this character Abed is on the spectrum, like it's known in the show that he's on the spectrum, and he experiences and interprets almost everything that happens to him through TV and film tropes. He's an encyclopedia of film and television tropes. So every interpersonal interaction, every triumph, every failure that he and the other characters experience, he's continually narrating, like, oh, well, this is
This is the way this narrative rolls out. This is
Yeah.
the way
Okay, yeah. Okay.
and it plays with that, and then where he's initially probably viewed by the other characters as a fool, he eventually attains this sort of special, almost sacred, in a sense, position where he will often have the answer to the dilemma because of his separateness.
Yeah, he's kind of oracular in some cases. Or
okay.
he's just so able to use the narratives, the existing library of narratives that are in his mind to predict what's going to happen, and then it sort of annoys the other characters to where they want to shut him down because they want to have the right to their narrative. We called our essay "The Right to a Narrative" because that's what we felt the young people were trying to
In Cabin in the Woods.
in the Cabin in the Woods. Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they also realize that he does have some special, and they treat it as a divine inspiration in some episodes. I'll send you a few episodes that you absolutely must watch if you have a few you can pick from.
Okay.
But I absolutely love that trope about that feeling of being divinely inspired, because I've been trying to think for a long time about what it is in the aesthetic experience of, I'll say metamodern here, a metamodern cultural product that has like an effervescent feeling for the reader or the viewer. There's a certain uplift, and you put a really nice fine point on it with this sense that it cracks us open because, like you said, we don't have discursive access to their logic. So we're left in a space that's an unclaimed kind of space. It's an unknown or an unclaimed, and there's actually a definition of awe that has that uses it's an unclaimed territory. That's how we can define the state of awe, the sort of the state of consciousness that's examined as an awe state. So anyway, that just resonated really well with me. And are there any other characters or products we'd like to talk about within that?
I don't know. There are oodles of them. From a philosophical point of view, once more I've taken a lot from Sloterdijk, and he talks about effervescence is something that's very important for him as a quality. He speaks of this bonding takes place in what he calls bubbles. And when you get a lot of bubbles, you have foam, you have effervescence, you have things that are, right now the English word doesn't occur to me, but it's this bubbling up of this foam, I guess, is what he calls
right.
also
The
foams.
foam is, mm-hmm.
It's a foam, and this idea of community is also interesting because he's also interested in how these this bonding takes place in communal situations, in larger social contexts.
And I guess we have attached that to the term quirky also, that there's something in the quirky character that almost unleashes a kind of like the quirky character does inexplicable things that then gives a kind of internal permission of some sort. I mean, this is under theorized to be sure, but there's a kind of permission to kind of come out with those statements that are unexamined, or to just, to claim the ability to be goofy or that sort of thing. I was curious, Raoul, if there's any reason why, if you've avoided the term quirky, or if you just didn't happen to use it for some other reasons.
The main reason is that I wanted to avoid talking about comedies because I think they're too difficult. Or they have a difficulty. You have to be culturally very sensitive, and I've been away from the U.S. for a long time, and I'm not sure if I always have the exact feel for inside sort of things that are funny to Americans who are immersed in popular culture. So this is why I kind of avoided it. I don't have anything against the term, conceptually against quirkiness. It's just that at some point I just decided I'm going to talk about serious genres and not get involved in comedies.
Do you want to talk about the film Get Out a little bit? Because when I watched it back when it came out, I had the feeling of like, I want to be able to think of this film as metamodern. Like it gave me a little bit of a metamodern vibe, but I had really no good way to justify that or theorize it within the constructs of metamodernism that are available to me. And I think you're very confident about it as an example of a performatist film. And I just rewatched it, so it's fresh in my mind, and I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts about it in terms of performatism are.
Well, I think the most important thing is that the film forces you, like we're all white people, forces us to identify with a black hero murdering a lot of white people. And which is something that is in normal cinematic terms is difficult to do, because race is so, everything connected with race is so loaded in American cinema. And this is the most extreme case of what white person doesn't want to see, a black person killing a lot of white people. And so he does it, I think, in a very clever way, as I recall the movie, is that you basically, because of the horror genre, you come to identify with him. And also, maybe the metamodernist approach to this would have to go through Frankenstein somehow. It was kind of a romantic thing. It's a kind of a Frankenstein type of thing. I don't know I wouldn't know how to do it myself, because I don't think in these romantic terms. But this sort of the idea that white people want black bodies so that they can live forever, and that is a kind of variation of this Frankenstein trope that is then broken apart, obviously, in the end, when the hero overcomes these evil the evil brain surgeon and his hypnotist wife, and etc.
Yeah, this is actually just crystallizing for me now because of what you just said. But I realized that, so the second time I watched it, I was kind of aware of a difference in how I perceived it compared to the first time, but I did not interpret that difference in relation to performatism and kind of what you just described. So the first time I watched it, I was totally immersed. I totally identified with the main character, the black photographer.
You don't.
And the horror, like why it was a horror film to me as the viewer, was because he was experiencing this horrific experience that he had, this horrific circumstance that he had to escape from, like in any other protagonist of a horror film. But the second time I watched it, I realized that when the actual gore begins in the movie, not just the tension and the fear, but when blood is actually spilled and limbs are chopped off and all that, it's the main character that's doing all of it to everybody else. And nobody even touches him. Nobody even gets any blood out of him. He's fine. And so,
No, that's not true. I think he's stabbed.
okay. I
He
take
might be
that back.
stabbed, but he could-
But overall,
overall,
he's the one who, if you were just watching it through like a silent video camera, or whatever, and you just saw it without any context, you would see him running around gruesomely slaughtering all of the other people. But the first time I watched it, it did do such a good job of forcing me into his point of view that didn't even occur to me until the second time I watched it. And I think that has something to do with what you're saying.
Yeah. And at the same time, obviously, the film has this didactic goal of, showing all these micro insults that black people are, subjected to. So that it has this, didactic core, and then it says, well, it forces you to identify with this poor guy.
I'm wondering something. I'm trying to think about this through your chapter 3 on performatism and the ethics of perpetration, and I'm not sure if it doesn't fit there or if it fits in some way I'm not coming up with yet. But what I was making of that chapter, and I'm thinking of the show Dead to Me right now, if we can kind of keep those both in our minds at once. The TV show Dead to Me, where you have these two you have to say endearing female protagonist characters who are both murderers. And there's a sense that in shows like that, and where there's this sense of putting a human face on evil acts. So it's sort of like it makes us stay with the evil as opposed to, shunting it away as a transgression that can't exist. And there's this way that I don't know if I'm thinking in the right way about your term perpetrations, but that perpetrations, even if they're evil, are shown to serve as like an obstacle to surmount. We're talking about the obstacle, the separateness that has to be somehow surmounted. And they perform the ability to transcend a boundary around strictly evil. So these are, in short, human beings who've done these really atrocious things, but they're still super, human and endearing, and you really feel like you're on their side somehow, even through these acts.
Well, I'm not. I would go a step farther and say, because identifying with murderers is something that is sort of classic. You can go back to Dostoevsky and Raskolnikov, and it's possible it was always possible to identify with bad guys, and even pretty bad guys or gals, whatever. And I think that what the difference, I think, especially in Dead to Me, is that it's well, first of all, it's ridiculously melodramatic. But it's obviously at some point it becomes so contrived that you are you're very, very much aware of this contrived, constructed nature of what is going on, and obviously that is in sync with these sympathetic murderer characters, and also these constructs that allow. A kind of how would you say a kind of justice to take place. I think the one character murders the husband of the other of her friend, and basically they both murder each other's husbands, and so in the end they're even. And then it's continued, I think, when the twin brother of the murdered husband is about to marry the one of the other characters. I forget their names now. There was
Jen and Judy.
Jen and Judy, right? But basically, that's it becomes very, very constructed in a very, very obvious way, and this would constitute the performatist dimension for me, which obviously augments these murderers are sympathetic characters.
Oh, I just found a quote that actually goes along with this, which, see, I found that I'm trying to conceptualize about how I agree with you, the sympathetic psychopath or the sympathetic
Hmm.
victim that then takes revenge or things like that. Those are long held tropes. But there's this way in which you talked about the role of hope at one point. That your quote was that with performatism, we have fictive imaginary horizons or projections that renew us ethically and emotionally. And there's just something really new, it seems to me, about the way these characters can be so deranged and so hopeful at the same time. And you have it in the show Shameless as well, where just about every character is terribly flawed, terribly short-sighted
Mm,
and
mm.
transgressive and socially inept or whatever. And you have this real love for this family of
Hmm.
characters.
Yeah,
And the
I've seen. I
worst,
think I saw maybe. Yeah, I've seen one, maybe one or two of the first shows. Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I just wanted to give us a chance to talk about how that's not just a modernist, it's not just redemption of some sort like that.
because in Shameless, and we're talking about the American version, not the British version.
Right.
Um,
But
it,
they're very similar, so.
in Shameless, yeah, it's just that the American version goes on for many, many seasons
Mm,
longer than the British, so things happen in it that didn't happen in the British.
okay.
And the most shameless character of them all is the father, the patriarch of the family, Frank, and he goes down in the final episode as shameless and dastardly, as he ever was. He does not redeem himself in any kind of traditional sense, and yet it feels like he triumphed somehow in getting to just be himself,
Mm.
just
Yeah,
kind of same with Breaking Bad, as it occurs to me.
yeah, yeah.
When Walter White dies, he dies doing what he surrounded by what he came to love.
Yeah, and I, of course, my ethical expedition into ethics started with Dexter, who is the
Mm.
most, he's a serial killer who can, nobody identifies with a serial killer, but he does have this. There's this. I think the most important thing for me in that the series was that there is always this horizon of redemption that is somewhere out there and that he's somehow trying to fulfill. And he's coming back, incidentally. I haven't seen
Oh, yeah.
it, but they have brought him back. I don't know what he's going to be doing now, but that there was always this possibility built into the structure of the narrative that, especially since he was killing off other killers, it was. He was doing something ultimately positive as a perpetrator.
I guess I put that in the category of how the monstrous other from postmodernism and prior
Yeah, yeah,
has become more the monstrous us. We're the
yeah,
monstrous.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
We
yeah,
can
yeah, yeah,
share
yeah.
that quality of monstrous. Sometimes in some of the monster narratives, I look at the monster as more human, like Hellboy or something. The monster is much more human, more humane than the human characters are, and they sort of have to negotiate each other by learning each other's how they operate in the world. And so in the end, there's a certain shared sense of
Yeah,
monstrosity.
yeah. No, I would also see that there's the other the monsters are we in a certain sense. Yeah. Would also jive with my take on Cabin in the Woods, that we're
Mm.
the
Mm.
monsters that are
All right.
that are causing all this gore to come about in the movie.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah, so God, I could talk for several more hours, but we probably should maybe start wrapping up, just so the video doesn't go on for too long for the viewer's sake. But are there any, I know, Linda, did you have it? I think you kind of have a list of certain points you wanted to get at. Is there anything still burning that we need to be sure to get in?
Well, I wondered about, we kind of started the conversation with the question of whether performatism and metamodernism are comparable things and or similar things, comparable things, doing similar work. And I wondered whether we felt we'd answered that question. And then also just to come back to the notion of what performatist and metamodernist products make available. You mentioned the word positive, Raoul, and that what's available in juxtaposition with postmodernism, of course, is something that looks positive, looks socially redemptive, looks hopeful, perhaps. And then I just wanted to talk about that a little bit more because of the sense that, at least in metamodernism, we also tried to think about things that don't necessarily look hopeful, could still be metamodern, to put it simply.
The thing about looking for things that are performatism, metamodernism, post-postmodernism started out, I think, with an optimistic kind of horizon or vibe, whatever you want to call it. The earliest works tended to actually have this to very clearly show that the transcendence is possible. At least if it's not possible, that there's a potential for it, even if you have unfortunate endings, or even if you have violent or bad endings. I think American Beauty was one such sort of a classic example of how that works. And I think that it's become more and more difficult to do that. This is my general feeling, is that I think this is probably the next development, is that we're going to get into a much more negative phase. I can't exactly say how that's going to look, but I think that the general socio-political context, obviously, the rise of populism, all these things are going to have a kind of a negative influence in the long run. But at the moment, it's just a feeling. It doesn't really manifest itself all that directly in the things that I've been reading. I just went through the best American short stories of 2024, and just systematic, just to see what they were like. And basically, I could find most of most of them are postmodern in their in their themes, in their narrative strategies, that sort of thing, with minor exceptions. Not all are necessarily positive. A lot of them are, do have this sort of a pessimistic outcome. But by and large, the aesthetic, the common aesthetic that we're talking about, I think dominates contemporary literature, certainly, and I think also contemporary filmmaking.
So I wonder, since you just mentioned reading a lot of short stories that you say are postmodern, would you say that there's a through line about attaining some kind of common, unified social stability or something? I mean, that was kind of one of those leading the witness questions, because I'm going to
Yeah, okay,
say,
no, it's not. No, it's, for the most part, it's about bonding. That this is sort of the glue that holds postmodern narratives together, is this potential possibility for bonding, and almost all these stories contain some sort of some sort of narrative involving bonding that is it's in some way successful. Let's put it that way. I think this was one thing that I found in almost all these stories.
okay. And to me personally, I'll just say, in the fiction I've been reading lately, I would say that the bonding, or the success of the characters, whatever that may mean, hinges around things that I put under my category of metamodern soteriologies, which is that there's a emphasis on smallness, ordinariness,
Yeah,
imperfection,
yeah, yeah.
seemingly insubstantial things that are tiny, hold these unexpected capacities, and that it's local, that there's a sense that any success on a community level or taking individual responsibility is on a local level rather than these sort of more grand narratives of
Yeah, I would totally agree. I mean, the grand narrative, there is no sort of utopian grand narrative. There is no overarching ideology that you find in these works. It's always on this sort of micro level that the authors or narrators are hoping for or place their hopes in. I think this is something that is, I would agree with you very much there.
yeah, and there's a sense
And to
of
see it, it's in, yeah, and it's interesting for me that you put it in terms of soteriology, in other words, in terms of salvation, of finding some sort of, something positive that is above and beyond the simple givens of everyday life.
yeah, it's a loaded term, obviously, salvific narratives, but those do run through all of our, all of our
Yeah.
literary products have something to do with that. Yeah, so we've got that smallness, we've got this localization, we've got this co-created and participatory sense of, I think, in culture making, in this,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in
definitely.
our, that's at least one way that we parse it in terms of it being metamodern, that participatoriness, rather than that single, heroic, salvific warrior, that identities can be multiple and can be multivalent, and you can be, at the bottom of the heap and then be the savior. Like this, there's certain Spider-Man movies that really, really have broken through the modernist narrative and really presenced a kind of anybody can be Spider-Man almost kind of thing. Um, that's one
Yeah,
example.
no, I think that's, I would definitely agree. That's corresponds to my own readings or viewings.
I have I don't know, this might be really obvious and goes without saying, but I just kind of had I think, a pithy way of approaching like our metamodernism and performatism the same, different, whatever. So it's like there's stuff out in the world that exists before and regardless of our theories about it. And many of us, including the three people in this conversation, feel that there's a trend that applies to a lot of this stuff and is worth making theories and telling stories about. And overall, metamodernism and performatism are looking at the same group of stuff overall, but our model and our theory and our language is not exactly the same. And the theory of performatism includes some structures that allow it to include some certain stuff that the theories of metamodernism don't have the capacity to explain in an intelligent way. And the theories of metamodernism might have, structures that allow it to identify certain things that the performatist don't. So, we're overall talking about the same collection of things, but then the theories that we developed in order to talk about them differ in such a way that each theory brings in some smaller set of peripheral things that the other one doesn't bring.
Yeah,
And
no, I agree.
yeah,
I agree totally that I mean, I think I wanted to, I mentioned to you Olga Tokarczuk, the Polish Nobel Prize winner, who basically in one of her essays picks up the concept of metaxy and applies. She says, "This is what I've been doing the whole time." She's oscillating. She says her characters oscillate, and that's one of her main tropes. Once more, this is something that, in a certain sense, escapes my approach, and so this is one way where you could, where metamodernism would, would augment or would, to fill a gap in what I'm doing. that I certainly don't make a claim to have a universal answer to, to describing what's going on in culture. It's just not possible. So I think they're some, for me, metamodernism is certainly an equally valid way of going about it, and productive. So.
Well, thank you so much for writing these books and for making your ideas available to us, because they are indeed fruitful, and there's cross-pollination that can occur, and we've certainly appreciated them.
So
So
thank you for spending this time with us.
yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and it was very enjoyable talking with you. That I think that's it's not often and especially in academia that you get to have these kind of conversations, because usually you get a lot of pushback and also sometimes a lot of condescension about how could you even talk about these sort of things. So it was fun, and I'm glad to have been able to be there.
All right.
And hopefully we'll have some more conversations in the future. I'm sure there's.
Well, I hope so. I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.